The Steam Deck might have only sold a few million units so far, but it represents the biggest threat to Xbox consoles and Windows-based PC gaming ever. That quote is from Tom Warren at The Verge, who recently published an editorial that attempts to follow the breadcrumbs that the Xbox team has been dropping recently, and the pot at the end of the rainbow is starting to look a lot more and more like what Valve has been building towards. I think we are all on pace for this crash collision between PCs and consoles, and personally, I think it's for the best. But of course I would say that. I've said several times on this channel that the Steam Deck poses a huge threat to console gaming. While Sony and Microsoft have been guarding the front door, they kind of failed to notice that PC gaming has been sneaking in through the back the whole time. The Steam Deck, though, it's not sneaking in through the back door. It's a Trojan horse, and Microsoft and Sony have let it in the house with open arms. Microsoft and Sony have both been stalwart supporters of Valve's handheld that could. Sony has taken PS5 exclusives and made them playable on a handheld with less gaming power than a PS4 Pro. Phil Spencer has been praising the Steam Deck, and Microsoft's been investing in Windows handhelds as an official partner for Asus and other OEMs. But what I see from Microsoft now in the last year is something you don't often see from companies of this size. They've recognized the threat and they're pivoting before it's too late. Microsoft were heavily invested in their subscription model, but I believe that now they see the subscription model is going to take a little longer than they would have liked to take hold in the gaming market. They're not going to abandon that model, but they need some more runway because while they were investing heavily in that model, the console market is also not seeing the growth that either Microsoft or Sony would like. All at the same time, PC gaming has been getting bigger and bigger. Back in August 2019, the peak number of concurrent Steam users online for that month was under 16 million. Less than 5 years later, and Steam recently reached a new high of 36 million concurrent users online in the month of February earlier this year. PC gaming has more than doubled in size in just 5 years. I don't know if you've noticed, but for many people, it's kind of like once you go Steam, you never really leave Steam. I've hopped in and out of PlayStation, Nintendo, and Xbox over the last 20 years, but Steam has been a near constant for me over almost that same time period. And it's wild too, because PC gaming should be an area where Microsoft is excelling, but they've almost entirely become inconsequential when it comes to PC gaming. Of course, most PC gamers are playing on Windows, so there is that, but relative to Valve, Microsoft is not seeing much revenue from this explosion in PC gaming over the last few years, and I think that's what they would like to see change. We may be entering a new Cold War in PC gaming, but this time, it seems the tables have turned. The first Cold War in PC gaming kickstarted back in 2012. Most of you know the story by now. Microsoft was launching Windows 8 with Universal Windows Platform apps and a Windows App Store, all in a bid to build a walled garden just like mobile phones had done on their operating systems. Gabe Newell famously spoke against it. Here's a key quote from a conference that he spoke at during that time. He says, "Valve wouldn't exist today without the PC, nor Epic or Zynga or Google. They all wouldn't have existed without the openness of the platform. There's a strong temptation to close the platform because they look at what they can accomplish when they limit the competitors' access to the platform and they say, that's really exciting. We are looking at the platform and saying, we've been a free rider and we've been able to benefit from everything that went into PCs and the internet, and we have to continue to figure out how there will be open platforms. We want to make it as easy as possible for the 2,500 games on Steam to run on Linux as well." End quote. Okay, there's a lot more, but I have to pause there for a moment. First of all, we're going to come back to the notion about open platforms. But second of all, this is kind of hilarious, right? Just 12 years ago, there were only 2,500 games on Steam, and now there are over 73,000 video games on the Steam platform. Now, Steam gets 2,500 new games in a month. It's insane. Also, do you see the vision? Back in 2012, Valve wanted to make it as easy as possible to make all of those games run on Linux, and now they've pretty much accomplished that goal. Bill Gates has this pretty famous quote. He says most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. We can look back at the last 10 years of Valve and really see that in action. No one would have expected them to meet that goal back then, but here we are. All right, we're actually getting to the good part. So Gabe goes on to say that investing in Linux is a hedging strategy, and here's why. He says, I think Windows 8 is a catastrophe for everyone in the PC space. I think we'll lose some of the top tier PC/OEMs who will exit the market. I think margins will be destroyed for a bunch of people, end quote. We all know by now that Microsoft had to pivot from their original strategy away from what they were intending with that Windows 8 App Store. So you can say that Valve won that battle. Part of the pivot, though, was driven by leadership change. You have to remember that Microsoft was helmed at the time by Steve Ballmer.
Developers, 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 developers. Developers, 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 developers.
This was also all during the time that Don Matrick was leading the Xbox division, and just 1 year prior to the Xbox One reveal that tanked the Xbox brand for a whole generation. This was really one of Microsoft's darkest times. Only 2 years later, Microsoft would change leadership and now be led by Satya Nadella, and he would almost immediately install Phil Spencer as the head of Xbox. Under this new leadership, priorities shifted. Microsoft completely abandoned the original plans for the App Store. They even started contributing to open source code bases and leveraging open source technologies and open platforms, which if you were a Microsoft Stack developer during that time, you know how weird that was. They also put a renewed focus on Azure, which would bring in recurring revenue. Meanwhile, Xbox worked on rehabilitating their brand while focusing on mergers and acquisitions, and of course, Game Pass. So the first Cold War was over as soon as it began, but it didn't matter. Valve had already made the realization that they were too dependent on Microsoft for their own success. They knew that they had to decouple their success from the whims of Microsoft, and that is eventually what set them on the path of Steam machines and eventually Proton and GameScope, and much later, the Steam Deck. But like I said, now the tables have turned. Valve used to be completely dependent on Microsoft. Now they have the Steam Deck, which, sure, as I said in the opening, it's only sold a few million units, but it paints a picture of Valve's own independence from the reins of its trillion-dollar neighbor just down the road from Valve's headquarters in Bellevue, Microsoft. And by the way, I should point out, Valve co-founders Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington and several other staff were Microsoft alum. Gabe Newell was the 271st employee at Microsoft, and he along with Mike were what were referred to as Microsoft millionaires because of the money they made during their tenure at Microsoft. Of course, they then defected and used those earnings to fund Valve. That aside, the point is, no longer is Valve dependent on Microsoft, and in fact, quite the opposite. If Microsoft wants to sit at the PC gaming table, now they're going to have to play ball with Valve. They tried keeping Microsoft PC games exclusive to their store, but it didn't really work out for them. Does that mean that there's another Cold War brewing for these two gaming behemoths? Well, it depends. Let me go back to that piece from The Verge. Tom Warren, who has been like a hound to a hare when it comes to these recent Xbox movements, he says the following. Microsoft Gaming CEO Phil Spencer has teased some potentially massive Xbox platform changes in recent weeks. At the same time, leaked internal memos have revealed an increased focus inside Microsoft on Xbox game preservation and forward compatibility. When you put all the breadcrumbs together, it feels like we're about to see Microsoft combine all the good parts of Windows and Xbox for its next generation console, end quote. It feels like we're about to see Microsoft combine all the good parts of Windows and Xbox for its next generation console. What is Tom talking about here? What are these supposed breadcrumbs? Okay, so you remember how Phil Spencer recently had that interview with Polygon, and Polygon asked him straight up, could he really see a future where stores like Itch.io and Epic Game Store existed on Xbox? And Spencer says, yes, absolutely. And listen to this. He says, quote, consider our history as the Windows company. Nobody would blink twice if I said, hey, when you're using a PC, you get to decide the type of experience you have by picking where to buy games. There's real value in that, end quote. Don't you see? He is saying almost the same exact thing Gabe Newell was saying back in 2012. Gabe said, we've been able to benefit from everything that went into PCs and the internet, and we have to continue to figure out how there will be open platforms. 2012 Gabe and 2024 Phil both see how much the open platform has benefited them, and they both see value in helping it grow. So no, this isn't a Cold War like back in 2012. Both companies are interested in the same things. But the flip side to that is, well, both companies are interested in the same things. Take a walk with me for a moment. Imagine you just picked up the new Asus ROG Ally 25. You've been hearing about this new Xbox mode and how the Ally 25 can seamlessly switch between Xbox mode and desktop mode. So you boot it up and sure enough, it goes straight into Xbox mode where you can see your list of Xbox games. Yes, Xbox games, not to mention Xbox 360 games and Xbox One games. You can also log into Game Pass and play your library there. But you also want to play your Steam games. So you switch to desktop mode, you install Steam, you download Bloodborne and Silksong, which of course have been released to PC by now, clearly, and you add them to Xbox mode. You go back into Xbox mode and there they are, ready for you to play. But there's more. Now imagine your friend who's been an Xbox fan since the 360 days. He just bought an Xbox 8K and he's really excited because he's been hearing about this new desktop mode on the Xbox 8K. He's even heard these rumors that you can install God of War and Helldivers 4 and play with PlayStation friends using crossplay. Okay, I know. I can see you headed to the comments now to call this fan fiction, but stick with me. Microsoft has not only been talking about making the Xbox more like PC, but they've also been talking about making the PC more like an Xbox. Listen to what Phil wants from a PC handheld in this interview with Polygon. He says, I want my Lenovo Legion Go to feel like an Xbox. I brought the Legion Go with me to GDC. I'm on the airplane and I have this list of everything that makes it not feel like an Xbox. Forget about the brand. More like, are all my games there? Do all my games show up with the save files that I want? I'll tell you the one game that doesn't right now, it's driving me crazy, is Fallout 76. It doesn't have cross-save. I want to be able to boot into the Xbox app in a full screen, but in a compact mode, and have all of my social experience there. Like, I want it to feel like the dash of my Xbox when I turn on the television, except I want it on those devices, end quote. I don't think Phil is simply posturing here. I think he really wants this and he really does expect for people to be able to sideload games to their Xbox. Actually, here is one more piece of evidence that's been sitting under our noses since 2022. 2 years ago, the vice chair and president of Microsoft published an update to Microsoft's strategy with regard to app stores. It's titled, Adapting Ahead of Regulation, a Principled Approach to App Stores. The underlying premise is just as the title implies. Microsoft wants to be ahead of regulation that still hadn't been enacted as it pertains to app stores, and they wanted to share what would be called their principled approach. There's this bit about Windows that seems absolutely inconsequential at the time. It says, quote, we also recognize that emerging legislation will apply new rules to companies that both run an app store and control the underlying operating system like Windows. Therefore, we are also committing today that we will continue to enable developers to choose whether they want to deliver their apps for Windows through our app store from someone else's store or sideloaded directly from the internet. End quote. That makes sense, right? That's how Windows has always operated, and that's how it should continue to operate. I bet Gabe was happy to see that. But just a little further down in that post, he says, likewise, we will build our next generation game store based on these new principles, and we will be transparent by providing updates on the ways that we're applying them. Ultimately, we believe that this principled approach will promote a more open app market and better serve our users and creators alike. And in turn, they will help us build a bigger and better gaming business. End quote. So this notion of Epic and Itch.io one day coming to Xbox isn't just something Phil Spencer was waxing philosophical about. It's key to Microsoft's strategy moving forward. The next Xbox store will allow for sideloading. There's no bones about it. They said it right in this post. And I've got to shout out Ty Moran at The Verge again, because he made a little mention about this quote in his editorial. And honestly, I hadn't seen anyone really bring this up before. Okay, so let's say Microsoft actually sticks to their word and does allow sideloading on Xbox. That doesn't explain what I said about being able to play Xbox 360 games on your PC. So maybe this one's a bit of a Jack Reacher, but Listen, here's what I'm thinking. A couple of weeks ago, Sarah Bond, the now president of Xbox, sent an internal email to her team that said, "We have formed a new team dedicated to game preservation, important to all of us at Xbox and the industry itself. We are building on our strong history of delivering backwards compatibility to our players, and we remain committed to bringing forward the amazing library of Xbox games for future generations of players to enjoy." End quote. I actually found this to be a bit curious. Why would Xbox be forming a team dedicated to game preservation? What more work were they planning on doing when it came to bringing forward the amazing library of Xbox games? They've already said that they're not adding any more previous generation games to the backwards compatibility program. Back in 2021, on the 20th anniversary of Xbox, they added 70 plus more games to the list and said, "This is it. This is our final edition." They celebrated the games, the gamers, the passion, and the developers, but said, "This is the final addition to the backwards compatibility program." So of course, they are likely looking forward to wanting to ensure that the next generation of Xbox can play Series X and Series S games as well as the previous library, but all of that should be relatively trivial if the next gen Xbox is x86 based, like the last two generations have been. In that case, maybe they're moving to an ARM-based architecture. They've been very keen to push Windows on ARM, so maybe Xbox is just the next logical step, and they'll need to make improvements to Rosetta if they want their previous gen games to run on the next Xbox. But maybe it's not necessarily ARM that they're trying to optimize towards. Maybe they want to take the existing and future backwards compatibility program games and make them all playable on PC. Maybe that includes OG Xbox games, and actually, it wouldn't be the first time that someone at Microsoft brought it up. In 2017, PC Gamer interviewed Phil Spencer and they asked him if we were going to see OG Xbox or Xbox 360 emulation on the PC. And he says, "Yes, I want people to be able to play games. Emulation is hard. Xbox 360 specifically is a PowerPC chip emulated to x86, which is difficult. It's a little bit easier when you have a fixed spec, when you think about Xbox, Xbox One S, and Xbox One X. And you think of the variable specs of the PC space, so you're taking a fixed spec PowerPC emulator and then moving it over to run on PC, so there is a lot of work there. The original Xbox, OG Xbox, is a little bit easier because that was an x86 chip that it was running on. Obviously, when we think about UWP and the ability for games to run across console and PC, we are getting closer. I want developers to be able to build portable applications, which is why we've been focusing on UWP for games and even apps that want to run on multiple devices. So I think we've got work to do there, but I think it's in our future." End quote. There you have it. Proof that Phil has also given a lot of thought to emulation of older Xbox consoles on the PC. Maybe that is what the games preservation team will be working on, and the full picture of Xbox starts to come into vision. So the interesting thing about the scenarios I described, both the Asus ROG Ally 25 and the Xbox 8K, is that both of those hypotheticals are similar to how the Steam Deck operates today. You boot into a gaming mode and you can swap to a desktop mode. Or, as my friend Cryobyte says of the Steam Deck, it's a console by default and an opt-in PC. And I can only imagine how far-fetched it must still sound, but I didn't pull this hypothetical out of my ass. I provided sources and references for everything I described. For handhelds, Phil Spencer said he wants to boot into the Xbox app by default with cross-saves and all of his Xbox social ecosystem while still maintaining the open platform of the PC. Multiple people at Microsoft, including Phil Spencer, said they will open up the gaming app store on the Xbox in the next generation to allow for sideloading or other app stores. And if you could sideload Steam on an x86 Xbox, that could very well mean PlayStation games on Xbox, since at that point, the Xbox itself would just be a PC, and PCs are getting PlayStation games more regularly, and they're even becoming more full-featured with crossplay, trophies, and the PSN social ecosystem. And I pointed to an instance of Phil saying OG Xbox emulation on PC is in their future plans. Honestly, the only thing I couldn't substantiate is that Silksong and Bloodborne would actually be on PC by then. So if the next generation of Xbox hardware looks so much like a PC, and even more like a Steam Deck, well, what about the Steam Deck? What if Valve had plans to make a new Steam Deck console, a new Steam machine, but Microsoft essentially beats them to market with a new Xbox that doubles as a PC? That is, I think, where we come to this clash of consoles and PCs, but also the new way that these two companies are going to be competing with each other. But keep in mind, they're also going to have to remain partners with each other too. Microsoft wants to keep their games on Steam, and Valve would love for Xbox players to be able to install Steam on their console. The point is, they appreciate that open platforms are valuable to them, and under current leadership, they're both going to continue focusing on that, which seems to be a lot more than we can currently say for Apple and Nintendo. By the way, I want to once again shout out Tom Warren and The Verge for this particular editorial, but also for their excellent coverage on the shifting landscape in video games and video game technology. Different game media outlets get criticized for various things, but I want to recommend that you look at the people and not the outlets. Sean Hollister at The Verge has been doing an excellent job of covering these emerging PC handhelds, and Tom Warren has been closely following Xbox's upcoming strategy. I'm just a dummy with hopefully some fun things to discuss, but people like this are doing the real groundwork that allows me to have these conversations, so check them out. I will leave links in the description. I hope you're all having a wonderful week. Deck Gang out. Goodbye.